so much for coming out, even though it's kind of a weird day where it was a lot of snow last night. My name is Ann Jameson. I am the co-lead of the North Side unit for the League of Women Voters of Chicago. My co-lead Kat is sitting in the booth, and she's going to be advancing things, so we all wave to Kat. And I want to introduce you to Rosemary Heilemann, who will be speaking tonight about the case for abolishing the Electoral College. Rosemary has been a League member for 40 years and is part of the Deerfield League, and she is the state issues expert on the Electoral College.
Well,
so
representative, I don't know
we'll
about
see
expert.
You're an expert.
So
welcome, Rosemary.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Glad to have you. I think we have a mixed crowd of some League members and some non-League members here this evening, so I'll keep the League stuff short, but I do want to say a couple of things about our convention and about our position. One of the handouts that's out on the table is the League position to abolish the Electoral College. Over its almost 100 years in existence, the League of Women Voters, in addition to registering voters and having candidate debates and things like that, has also taken positions on a wide number of subjects, from immigration to healthcare to nuclear proliferation. And one of the positions that the League adopted in 1970 was to adopt the abolish the Electoral College. So at that time in the 70s, that was in the days of Birch Bayh, and he had an amendment that almost got through, you know, but they just didn't get it. And it's come up numerous times in the years since then. But as with many people in the country, you know, as soon as the election's over, it kind of goes in the background. You forget about it until the next time around. So the League at the national level, this is their book called Impact on Issues. You can actually buy it at Amazon for $5. Has all our positions and some background. What they do every 2 years previous to convention is they figure out what issues are the most important to concentrate on, because they cannot be proactive on all these positions. So they send a survey to all the leagues to try to get some input. In recent years, the National League has focused on a branded approach they call making democracy work. So it's working against gerrymandering, against voter suppression, access to elections, and then there's a fourth one which will come to me, money in politics. And so these are the things that they really want to be proactive on. Now, if something in here were to come up in Congress that we have a position on, the National League, in a reactive way, certainly would go and testify if something came up based on our positions. But there's a way before convention to try to get the National League to be proactive about your pet topic, which in our case was the abolition of the Electoral College. So we wrote and we took part in that process, and it came to convention, and it was a non-recommended item, so there was a way to make a motion for a non-recommended item. And there was another group, and if you look at the position, if you pick it up out there, in 2010, the League did add one additional sentence into its position, which is that the Interstate Compact, the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, is an acceptable alternative until the abolition of the Electoral College. So Illinois signed on 10 years ago in 2008. So we figured, our committee thought, you know, that's all well and good if people want to work on the compact, but what, are we supposed to twiddle our thumbs here in Illinois for the next who knows how many years until the compact is passed, which is not even a permanent solution? Let's just work for an amendment. If we don't try, we'll never get it. And so at convention, some of the fighting that you saw was between the group that wanted the National League to be proactive on just the compact, because they didn't want them to spend any time on the amendment. And then there were us. And we wanted to have everybody happy, let the compact people work on their stuff, and we wanted the National to be proactive on the amendment. So we did lose that motion. And the people who were backing the compact did win that motion. So all that means is that the National League will be more proactive currently on the compact unless we get a bill in the Congress, and then in a reactive way they still will support abolition by amendment. And then the last day, they went home. The other side went home and left us when they were passing the resolutions. And so we presented our resolution, which was our second strike in case the first one failed, and we passed a resolution. And so we were very happy. And the resolution says that the League of Women Voters of the United States urgently reaffirms its long-held position that the Electoral College should be abolished. So yay, we're happy because that means we can use that to say, look, this has come up in recent times. This is the affirmation by the League currently that we are definitely in favor of abolition. And so we can use it in our publicity and speaking for the League. So we're very happy about that. So that's for the Leaguers who were there. It was a lot of work, but it was worth it, you know, because otherwise you're trying to work from a position that nobody's talked about for a while. So our committee is a committee from many different leagues in Illinois, and we came together at the Illinois Convention, and we've been working, and you'll see on the back of the one handout, we have sent out MailChimp mailings to all 700 leagues in the United States. We have an email address, we have a Facebook page, and one of the handouts out there, we have gotten endorsements from some renowns, from well-known constitutional scholars, both as to the contents of our presentation and also for our effort in general. So we're very pleased, so we feel like we have some authority as we go forward with this. This presentation I'm going to present to you is scripted, and it's scripted for many reasons, but one of them is we want other groups, other leagues, non-leagues, Rotary groups, anybody to give this presentation. So all the materials, the presentation itself, are on the League of Women Voters of Wilmette website and can be accessed, and that information's on the back of the handout also. And so I will be reading the script as you would read it yourself if you want to give it to your group, which I encourage you to do so. So, on with the show. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. The League is a natural home for the movement to abolish the Electoral College because the League is about making democracy work better for everyone. The League is specifically and proudly nonpartisan, which means that it can work to improve our democracy without partisan rancor and can help unite people around a common purpose. It has national reach and a trusted voice, as well as over 600 local leagues across the nation that are comprised of citizens like us working to improve our democracy. The League of Women Voters recommends many changes to our election system that would increase fair and representative participation in our democracy, from issues such as voter information and registration to candidate selection and election procedures. Today we'll talk about how the Electoral College damages our democracy and how the League is working to abolish it in favor of a direct popular vote for electing the president and vice president. They adopted this position in 1970 and most recently updated it in 2010. First, let's talk about where the Electoral College comes from. Why did the framers of the Constitution create the Electoral College? This is a discussion which could and has taken up several book chapters. I'll try to distill it down to its essential elements as understood by scholars who have tried to answer the question. The framers' most important consideration was that they wanted to limit the potential for corruption and concentration of power and to maintain independence between the executive and legislative branches. Therefore, they wanted a method other than having Congress select the president, which was the method originally suggested by the delegates. So why not just elect the president directly by the people? Some of the Constitution's framers worried that large distances and lack of communication would make the people ill-informed about the candidates and unlikely to choose the best person. They worried the people could be easily misled by a few designing men, or would simply vote for the candidate from their own state. They wanted some kind of intermediary system. It's worth noting that very few of the framers were worried about angry mobs hijacking the selection of the president. The worries were more about how a vast population spread over a large country would be able to make an informed choice. There was some element of the ongoing tension between northern and southern states as well. Slaveholding states did not want direct election because they wanted their enslaved people to count as 3/5 of a person in determining the number of electors the state received. Remember that that was the arithmetic used to determine their numbers in the House of Representatives. So having an elector system artificially boosted the voting representation of the slaveholding states, just as in Congress. Whereas a direct popular vote would only count the number of people who could vote, which of course did not include enslaved persons. In fact, evidence suggests that there was a lot of discussion, confusion, and changing of minds during the process of figuring out the election system. It was one of the last issues discussed at the exhausting, long, hot, contentious convention, and fatigue and impatience may well have played a role in its adoption. It had broad but unenthusiastic support and seemed like the best they could do at the time. It was the second choice of many, but the first choice of few, with little idea how it would play out in reality. One historian has called it a jerry-rigged improvisation. Most of the framers did intend for the selection of the president to be based on the popular wishes of the citizenry, with the elector system as an intermediary system intended to breach the difficulties of distance and communication. James Madison considered the elector system to be the next best thing to direct selection, saying, "The president is indirectly derived from the choice of the people." However, there is some evidence that they also expected the electors to exercise their own discretion in the selection of the president as a bulwark against corruption, bias, or misinformation. But the electors have almost always acted as a rubber stamp on the votes of the people, with very few exceptions. In those instances where an elector has voted differently from the state's voters' dictates, they have generally been met with a great deal of protest and anger, which is to say, the people expect the electors to be a rubber stamp on the will of the people and have never been interested in them exercising their own discretion. Notice that none of the founders' original concerns remain relevant today. Citizens are quite able to become informed about the candidates no matter where they live. The framers' concern about the corruption and concentration of power that would come if Congress selected the president is still valid, but no one is proposing that we move to this system. And any notion that we might need electors to exercise their own discretion to overturn a so-called poor decision by the people has just not been borne out over time. The people don't want this, and the electors have rarely done it. So in looking at how the Electoral College came about, it's clear that this is not a foundational text of our Constitution that should not or cannot be changed. It is an imperfect system that tried to address the concerns of the framers at the time. Just as we have changed our system of electing the vice president and senators, remember the vice president used to be counted separately. They didn't run as a pair, so they changed that. And the senators used to be chosen by each state's legislature. So that was changed by amendment as well. So those are two big changes in election procedures that were changed by amendment. We can also change our system of electing the president if we think it's necessary to improve our democracy. And there's ample evidence that this system is directly damaging to our democracy and does, in fact, need to be changed. Does the League of Women Voters take the position to abolish the Electoral College? It's really very simple. It comes down to the concept of one person, one vote. The unintended result of the Electoral College is to put the choice of president and vice president in the hands of voters in only a few so-called battleground states or swing states. I don't have to tell you the name of these states because we are all very, very familiar with them. They are 4 of our well-known swing states, and they are among the 19 states that received all campaign visits from the 2 presidential candidates in 2008. The other 31 states received not a single presidential visit. Well, you might ask, so what? In an age of television and smartphones, we can easily watch the candidates' speeches no matter where they make them. And we can get the highlights from any number of news outlets. True. But the problems with this system go well beyond our ability to hear what the candidates have to say. Part of the League's core mission is to encourage the informed and active participation of citizens in government. As such, perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Electoral College system is that it creates a disincentive to vote for citizens living in non-battleground states, which is the majority of people in our country. If you live in Illinois or Mississippi, why should you bother going out on a cold or rainy day to vote when you know your state is going to go blue or red anyway? And I like to talk about Illinois. So Illinois in recent years has pretty much gone Democratic. So if you're a Republican supporter or a third-party supporter, why would you even bother to vote in Illinois for president? Because the votes would all go to the Democrats. And in fact, if you're a Democrat, why would you bother to go out and vote? Because it'll go Democratic without you. In this system, you could have 3 people vote. And if 2 of them went one way, all 20 electoral votes would go to that person. So to me, and as a leaguer, it creates a cynicism and a negativity towards voting, especially I think the young people feel this, and it percolates down to the other positions, even though they aren't handled that way. So we really feel that this is, as league members, we want everybody out there voting and to feel that their vote counts. So this is the biggest thing to me. So where are we? So the data from 2016 bear this out. Now we're going to change this because it's a little deceptive. Notice the scale is from 52 to 66%. That's not a 100% scale. However, we're still talking about a big difference here. The data from 2016 bear this out. In the graph, you can see that the percentage of eligible voters who cast a vote for president was significantly lower in non-swing states compared to the swing states. The Electoral College decreases participation in our democracy. This is bad for democracy. So even if that's 10%, well, if you have a state with 6 million people, that's 600,000 people that maybe stayed home. Another significant negative effect of the Electoral College system is that it polarizes our electorate and exaggerates our sense of being a divided nation, a nation of red versus blue. Did you know that in Alabama in 2016, all right, our last election, 35% of the voters voted for Hillary Clinton? Or that 32% of California voters voted for Donald Trump? That is a lot of people, not a fringe minority, but a significant portion of the populations of these states. And these are 2 solidly red or blue states. What about Colorado, where 43% of voters went for Trump? Or Georgia, 46% of voters in Georgia voted for Clinton. Doesn't matter. You look at this map, all you see, red and blue, right and left, black and white. There are no centrists, there's no complicated middle ground. There's no reason to even talk to those people in the other states because they are just too different from me. Their views are too extreme. This map, with which we have all become so familiar, is extremely damaging to our national unity and our ability to see the great variety of public opinions that exist everywhere and that deserve to be heard. Indeed, they need to be heard, as diverse opinions are as critical to democracy as the vote itself. Without the Electoral College, we wouldn't have to see our election results through this distorted lens. What if the election results simply look like this? Two numbers, both very large, even in the most lopsided of victories. Remember Ronald Reagan versus Walter Mondale in 1984? You may remember it as the most lopsided Electoral College victory in modern history, which it was. But you probably don't remember that more than 37 million people voted for Mondale, which was 41% of the voters. That is not a trivial number, and it highlights the way the Electoral College simply erases the diversity of opinion in our democracy. Because when we see it through the Electoral College, almost all of those so-called blue votes are utterly forgotten, erased. Where did all those Mondale voters go? They're just gone, they don't exist, or they all went to Minnesota, I don't know. All we see is 525 to 13, the electoral outcome. And so it gives this impression of a landslide, which it was a big win, but it wasn't as big as that makes it look. If we began to see election results like this, might we begin to see ourselves as part of a unified democracy, choosing our leader together, no matter where we live? Might we become more open to diverse, complicated opinions among our neighbors and fellow citizens, more willing to live among people who disagree with us? Imagine if, instead of seeing ourselves as red or blue, we simply saw ourselves as Americans. The results in two recent elections point us, of course, to another serious problem with the Electoral College, which is that it can lead to a presidential winner who did not receive a majority of the votes. This has happened 5 times in our history, and it's the main reason most people find the Electoral College troubling. You may have heard somebody say, well, yes, all this is true, but here's why the Electoral College still makes sense. We'd like to walk through the most common myths and misperceptions about the Electoral College and what it does and does not accomplish, what it was meant to do, and how it's impacting our democracy. These are not just fringe theories, by the way. These are the main points that supporters of the Electoral College use to defend this antiquated system, and none of them stands up under scrutiny. Myth number 1. Without the Electoral College, our presidents would all be chosen by a couple of big states, like California, New York, and Texas. Let's run through the numbers to see how it would actually play out in an election by national popular vote. Let's say, for the sake of this example, that every state in the union, so all the states are voting for the same person, they're going the same way, and they're going to vote 60 to 40. Now, you know, most of the states are like 45-55 or, 40-60. So we're going to say every single state in the country voted for candidate A, and they did by a 60 to 40 margin. Okay, an absolute landslide, an unbelievably strong preference for one candidate. And let's see how many states it would take to get us even up to 50% if we elected the president by the national popular vote total, going in order from the largest states to the smallest. California has the most voters, so 60% of its voters would represent 7% of the national total. Next is Texas, so we'll add that to the total. Remember, in this example, we have 60% of voters choosing the same candidate in every state. So we're seeing how long it would take that candidate to get more than 50% of the votes. Now we add Florida, and here's New York. Now we add Pennsylvania. Now Illinois. And we're not even halfway there yet. And this is assuming all the states are voting for the same person. Let's add a half dozen more states and see where we get. In fact, it would take the votes of 30 states to get us up to 50%, even in this incredibly lopsided scenario. In reality, of course, California and Texas might go for different candidates, in essence, canceling each other out. And the margins of victory would likely be much smaller in many of the states, which means it would take even more states' voters to get us to 50%. And you can do this same exercise for cities, by the way. The 10 largest cities in the country only make up about 10% of the vote. If the largest 100 cities all voted unanimously for the same candidate, it would still only get us to 30% of the vote total, nowhere near half. And this top 100 list includes cities like Laredo, Texas, and Spokane, Washington. These are cities with populations in the 200,000s. It is simply mathematically impossible for an election by popular vote to be determined by the largest states or the largest cities. It takes everybody. The fact is that direct election by popular vote would ensure that every person is equally represented, regardless of where they live. Voters from swing states would count just the same as voters from non-swing states. Voters from the city would count just as much as voters from the country. A California Republican's vote would count just the same as a California Democrat's. Let's look specifically at California, where the presidential vote is split just as it is in all states. 32% of California voters went for Donald Trump in 2016. Once the state's votes were totaled, all 4.5 million of those Trump votes were erased. Why should only a portion of a state's votes count in choosing the president for all the people? In a national popular vote system, those votes would be added to the national total, along with the votes from all the other states, regardless of who got the most in each state, and regardless of whether that state is large or small. The fact is that we no longer would be voting by state, but by person. So a California voter would get no more to say in our presidential election than a voter from Mississippi, Rhode Island, Kansas, or any other state. This is what the framers intended when they unanimously agreed with James Madison's statement that the president is to act for all the people, not for the states. Myth number 2. Smaller, less populated states need the protection of the Electoral College to ensure their interests are represented by the president. The fact is, there is no coherent small state or large state interest that needs protecting by the Electoral College. Even the smallest state has substantial diversity within it, and it is a fallacy to suggest that when a state goes red or blue, that it represents the interests of the entire state. The concerns of a farmer are likely to be very different than those of a computer programmer, whether they live in New Hampshire, Nebraska, or any other small state. Small states represent a great diversity of economic interests, and they share many of these interests with large states. For example, agriculture. Most farmers live in states with large populations, such as Texas, Florida, California, and Illinois. And they share economic interests with farmers from smaller states all over the country. The great political battles of American history have been fought between opposing ideologies or economic interests, not between large states and small states. There is no coherent small state interest that needs protecting by the Electoral College. The representatives of small states do not vote as a bloc in Congress, and their citizens do not vote as a bloc for president. The numbers from the 2016 election show this emphatically. The smallest 1/3 of the states, those with fewer than 6 electoral votes, did not all go for the same candidate. In fact, they were exactly evenly split, with 8 going for Clinton and 8 going for Trump. Small states do not vote as a bloc, and they do not benefit from the Electoral College. In fact, small states are routinely ignored by presidential candidates under the current system. Instead, the candidates focus their time in the so-called swing states that will decide the election. And then we've got to get this, the script has the same figure. All campaign visits went to those 19 states. So there is no basis for the myth that smaller, less populated states need the protection of the Electoral College to ensure their interests are represented by the president. And in fact, the Electoral College actually diminishes the rightful representation of the residents of larger states. For example, now you have to use your spatial memory here because here, notice how big Virginia is and how small Delaware is, okay, by quite a percentage. For example, Virginia's population is almost 9 times larger than Delaware's, but, it only gets about 4 times as many electors because electors are based on the number of senators and representatives in each state. So every state gets the number of representatives, then they all get another 2. So that another 2 means a lot more if you only have 1 representative than if you have 50 representatives. It's going to be more impactful and have more influence. So then the voter is really getting more of an impact for those who vote for the winner. And if you think about it, people who live in those smaller states where their vote is overrepresented, then the losers are losing worse because they have this overrepresented vote. But anyway, that's a side piece. So, myth number 3, the Electoral College protects the rights of the minority from the tyranny of the majority. Protecting minority rights is a critical part of democratic societies, and the Founding Fathers designed our government accordingly. As a result, 2 of our 3 branches of government are designed to ensure the protection of minority rights. The first is the courts. Their role is to ensure the constitutional rights of the individual, regardless of the opinion of the majority of citizens. The second is the Senate, in which every state, regardless of population size, gets 2 representatives. This ensures that Wyoming gets heard just as loudly as New York, even though more people live in New York. The courts and the Senate protect the rights of minority groups. The president is to represent the interests of all Americans as fairly and equally as possible. That means 1 person, 1 vote. Myth number 4. Abolishing the Electoral College will mostly benefit Democratic candidates. Modern analyses show that in 1960, Republican Richard Nixon actually won the popular vote by about 48,000 votes over Democrat John Kennedy. But he didn't pursue it because the Electoral College the vote was so lopsided, it was different, and he thought it would look like sour grapes. But it had to do with Alabama and the way they apportioned their electors. This is the Electoral College map for the 2004 election, where George Bush won over John Kerry with 3 million more popular votes. So this is how it looked. However, if Kerry had won only 60,000 more votes in Ohio, he would have won the Electoral College and thus the election, even though Bush would still have had nearly 3 million more votes. So this was a near miss for the Republicans. So it could happen again to them just as easily as it happened to Democrats. And on a more personal level, what about the Republican voter in so-called blue Vermont, or the Democrat voter in so-called red Kansas? Neither of these voters feel that their vote for president counts. This is a disincentive for them to vote, and this is bad for democracy. This system can and has affected both parties. This is a nonpartisan issue, and people are trying to make it a partisan issue, but it is truly for the benefit of all. So how do we do it? How to abolish the Electoral College? The League of Women Voters supports a constitutional amendment that would replace the Electoral College with direct election of the president. In theory, it's quite simple. Congress passes an amendment by 2/3 in each house. It does not get signed by the president, just the two houses, but 2/3. And then 38 states, which is 3/4, have to ratify it. Such an amendment has been proposed many times, and the latest was in 2016 by Senator Barbara Boxer of California and by Representative Charles Rangel of New York. The language is very simple. Quote, proposing an amendment to the Constitution of the United States to abolish the Electoral College and to provide for the direct popular election of the President and Vice President of the United States. Each bill had only a couple of co-sponsors and no action was taken. We need to build a strong, loud, persistent voice of the people, urging our representatives in Congress to introduce and co-sponsor this bill again this year. We need to build momentum to make this an issue that Congress can no longer ignore. And in our committee, we say there are a certain number of people we're never going to convince. But the ones, that we should even do this, but the ones that are the hardest for us to persuade are people who think it should be abolished but think it could never happen because it's a long, drawn-out affair. But it has happened, as you will see in a little while. Now, getting to a constitutional amendment will nevertheless take time. It's not going to happen this year. The League of Women Voters is currently focusing on what we're doing today, which is starting discussions about where the Electoral College comes from and how it's bad for our democracy. I got to throw my Carol story in there. Carol came to my presentation at Oak Park with her sister-in-law, and I told that crowd also, I said, we have to keep the conversation going, just keep talking and talking and writing. And so at Christmas, Carol says there was a lull in the family conversation, and all of a sudden Diane pipes up, so what about that Electoral College? I love that story. But that's it, and people have to be persuaded that, oh yeah, that's a thing. We actually have the power to do it. So perhaps importantly, we want people to understand that passing a constitutional amendment is possible and can happen. Many of us probably think that ratifying a new amendment is a thing of the past, something for a bygone era of political unity, a quaint anachronism. Here's a timeline showing the dates that all amendments after the Bill of Rights were ratified. You can see that our history includes flurries of constitutional activity punctuated by long periods of inactivity. There was a period of 60 years between the first two clumps, then another gap of 43. There were 18 years between the amendments of the 30s and 50s and 60s, then a gap of 21. It's been 26 years since the last constitutional amendment was passed in 1992. What distinguishes these periods of constitutional activity? They tended to be periods of great national political activity, where citizens were feeling that our democracy was in crisis, where the demand for change across our society was persistent and loud. There was the period after the Civil War, the progressive era of the turn of the last century, and the civil rights era in the 1950s and 60s. We may be in the middle of another period of political activity, of demand for change. Only time will tell. But the level of activity we are seeing now and the genuine concerns about the resilience of our democracy are remarkable. In fact, we may be on the verge of adding a 28th Amendment to the Constitution. The Equal Rights Amendment passed Congress in 1972, and as of 2 years ago needed only 3 more states to ratify it in order to become part of our Constitution. In 2017, Nevada ratified it. In 2018, Illinois ratified it. Yay! Yeah, we'll give that a yay. So if 1 more state ratifies, we will add the 28th Amendment to our Constitution. Amending the Constitution is not a thing of the past. It is a thing of right now. There is a process for doing so, and that process requires the citizenry to make it known to our legislators that we want change. We do that all the time with legislation. It's the same for amendments. We just have to build a stronger consensus and a louder voice. It is, as always, one step at a time. All right, this is the compact. And again, Illinois signed this 10 years ago, and we can't speak against it. It's in the league position. So people who want to work on it, as far as our committee is concerned, can go right ahead and work on it. But we're going forward with the rest of the position, which is complete abolition. But about this, because of the long time, and there's a handout out there if you do want more information about it, just for your interest. This one is the compact handout. Because of the long time frame expected for an amendment to pass and be ratified, the League also supports an interim measure that would effectively nullify the Electoral College and result in the election of the president by popular vote, while we continue working on a long-term constitutional amendment. This measure is called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, and it would guarantee the presidency to the candidate who receives the most popular votes in all 50 states and the District of Columbia combined. It pledges a state's electoral votes to the candidate who wins the national popular vote, and it would not take effect until enacted by states possessing a majority of the electoral votes, 270. The National Popular Vote Interstate Compact has been enacted into law in 12 states with 172 electoral votes. The compact would take effect when enacted by states with 98 more is what they need. This is a nonpartisan issue. It has been passed by strong majorities in both Republican-controlled and Democrat-controlled state houses and senates. One reform which the League specifically rejects is the voting by electors based on proportional representation in lieu of the present winner-take-all method. The Constitution says that states are free to assign their electors however they see fit, and winner-take-all is not the only option. Currently, Maine and Nebraska assign their electors proportionate to each candidate's vote percentage in the state. So, for example, if 40% of Nebraska voters chose candidate A, that candidate would get 2 of Nebraska's 5 electoral votes. The problem with this system is that it's actually fairly likely that no candidate would receive the 270 electoral vote majority needed to win. This, according to the Constitution, would send the election of the president into the House of Representatives, where each state, regardless of population, would receive only 1 vote. This would further remove the election of the president from the will of the people and would be in direct contrast to the intent of the framers of the Constitution. And we're going to go through the, let's see, are we in the right place here? 66. You're probably scratching your head trying to figure out why this system would make it unlikely that a candidate would receive 270 electoral votes. The reason is that we always have more than just 2 parties running for president. There are third parties, fourth parties, and beyond. In the 2016 election, votes were actually cast for 31 different candidates, plus a none of the above in a few states. Let's run through a quick example with the 2016 election. So if we all did like Maine and Nebraska, here you see that Arizona has 11 electoral votes. 45% of voters chose Clinton, 50% chose Trump, and 5% chose another candidate. If we allot the electoral votes proportionately rather than winner take all, we get 5 votes for Clinton, 5.5 for Trump, and 1/2 for the others. Here's Colorado with 9 electoral votes. 47% for Clinton, say 44% for Trump, and 9% for others. And you can see how their electoral votes get apportioned accordingly. You can start to see what's happening here. As the other candidates are taking just a little bit away from the total electoral votes in each state until we finally get to the total. And we see that neither candidate has reached 270 votes. So the 2016 election would have gone under this system to the House of Representatives to elect the president had we used a proportional means in all the states for allotting the electoral votes. The simplest, most permanent solution is to elect the president by national popular vote. Now, there's one other thing about that House of Representatives business. Even currently under the Electoral College, That is a possibility, and it had happened back in 1824 with Adams. But think about Bernie Sanders. If Bernie had decided to run as an independent, which he thought about, but he decided against, I think he probably would have won in Vermont. He certainly would have disrupted the vote totals in some of those close states. He might have won Hawaii, he might have won Oregon, and you could have had a situation in this last election where neither Trump nor Clinton, Bernie wouldn't have gotten 270, but neither Trump nor Clinton they could both have been prevented from getting 270 votes. Then today it would go to the House of Representatives. Now, and you know, the League of Women Voters of Chicago has been kind enough to purchase for you some copies of the Constitution if you wish, so they're free to you, they're on the table. And if you look at it, when it goes to the House of Representatives, each state gets one vote. So the whole delegation of New York, one vote. All 20 people in Illinois, one vote. That guy in Wyoming, one vote. So that's the system we have right now, which could happen. There have been some strong, you know, you remember some of the third-party candidates from the past. So anyway, where are we up to? 670. So abolishing the Electoral College would be a common sense solution to update a system that most Americans agree is utterly out of date, confusing, other countries don't know what we're talking about, and downright silly. It's time to start building the momentum that will once and for all abolish this dysfunctional system of electing our president. This may seem like a daunting task, but remember that we've amended the Constitution to change the way we elect senators, to impose term limits on the presidency, to include Washington, D.C. in the election of the president, to eliminate the poll tax, and to change the voting age to 18. All amendments that affect the way we elect our representatives in Washington. There is no reason we cannot abolish the Electoral College if we decide to do it. So let's get to work. Here's what you can do now. First, spread the word. Talk to your friends and family about the Electoral College, like Diane did, the harm it causes and how it can be abolished. Host a presentation or give one yourself to any community group that you're a part of. We have a shortened version online for Rotary and Optimist groups that have just lunchtime meetings. So it's a 20-minute version of this talk that is available for, you know, shorter presentations. You can find all the materials on the website of the League of Women Voters of Wilmette. They have been kind enough to host us on their website, including this word-for-word script to go with the presentation. We created this presentation specifically to be used by as many people as possible. And we've gotten some emails from people in New Jersey, and in one of our members was visiting her daughter in Arlington, Virginia, and they wanted somebody, and she went and talked to them. A friend, one of the other committee members, and I went up to Manistee, Michigan, and did a talk. So, and California, we've had a long time conversation with San Luis Obispo, California. Next, you could email us at abolishelectoral@gmail.com. And if some of the pieces say LWV, abolish electoral, and some of them say just abolish, we have both, and they both come to my desktop, so you can use either one if you have another piece that has the other email. You can follow us on Facebook and share our posts on social media. Talk to your senators and congressional reps about their views on the Electoral College. If your league does legislative interviews, this is the perfect time to have a conversation about this. If you are seeing a state office holder, ask if they would support their state voting yes to an amendment to abolish the Electoral College. So on the national level, your national legislators is for the first run through to get the amendment passed in the two houses. But then it's going to have to be ratified by the states. So if you're talking to state office holders, eventually we hope it'll get to them too. If you attend a candidate forum, well, those are passed for now, but this is not going to happen tomorrow, so think about this for the future. If you attend a candidate forum, ask for their stance on abolishing the Electoral College. We need our legislators to begin hearing from us on this issue, and we need to keep talking about it. And finally, you can donate to the League of Women Voters of Illinois Electoral College Committee. A donation of any size will demonstrate that this movement has widespread support and will help us educate voters and increase our impact. And so there it is. Thank you. You can do this.
I'm going to remind everyone again that this microphone is just for TV, so listen to my voice. Thank you, Rosemary.
And
we
my
now
pleasure.
have time for questions. We will be able to line up here. Should we line up, Carrie, or should we have them go to this, just stand at their seats? We'll do stand at your seats. And remember to project, because again, I'm going to hand you this microphone. It does nothing for you here. So I saw you. Yes.
All right, so this doesn't have to do with abolishing the Electoral College, but does the League of Women Voters have a position on a national primary instead of the primary system that goes state by state?
It does not, that I know of. We can look later, but I'm pretty sure we do not have a position. But that's an interesting reform that people are talking about. So yeah, there's a lot of demand for that.
Hi there, thanks. This is super interesting and informative. What I'm really curious about is who are the constituents for and against? Where do we stand? Who are the people? And I understand that there is bipartisan support, right? There's a lot of right-wing
There
support
should be
for
bipartisan
different
support.
reasons, but
Yes.
please tell me.
Well, now you're asking my opinion, okay? So this is not from any league thing. It has become tarnished, as so many things have, with a partisan brush, which is too bad, because this really it's not good for all the reasons we said. So one group feels that this is a knee-jerk reaction from progressives because they're unhappy with the last election, and therefore this is what they're doing. But in fact, well, there's a certain element of that because there was a disconcerting reaction to the way the election went. But we've had this position since 1970. We've started and tried to do it. And so the fact that maybe we're going to exert more energy again this time is partly that, but it's just about time. It's time to clarify this. So there are those who feel that it's a progressive knee-jerk reaction. Then I think there are some people who sincerely are real, because these little constitutions, they come from an outfit in Idaho, and I haven't looked too close into their politics because I don't want to know, because the Constitution is correct. That's all I care, and it's 40 cents, and that's it, so I don't want to look into their politics. But I think this group, for example, I think they're kind of like the Founding Fathers. What they said could never be changed because it fell from their mouths, kind of thing. But I mean, that's, people are sincere. There is a lot to admire, for heaven's sakes, of the Founding Fathers. So they are loath to make any changes. So that's another group that's against it. But the against it are who knows, if you really point it out to them. And then there's a large number of people who just think it's impossible. That it's a waste of time, and some of those have been converted to the compact, and that's fine, let them be converted to the compact, but the compact is temporary and it has no force of law other than an agreement between states. So anyway, it has a lot of problems. So I think the largest group is people, and then look at the voter turnout. There are people who just don't want to get involved with politics. To those of us who are interested in league members and not league members, who realize that decisions made by our legislators actually affect our lives, and you need to be involved and speak up. But there are so many people, and again, what's our voter turnout? About half, And you run into these people, oh, they're all a bunch of crooks, or I don't understand it, or I'm not interested in politics. Well, aren't you interested in your economic viability and the planet we live in? But no, they see it as a separate thing. That is so hard when you kind of live and breathe, government and all these issues, to understand people. You think, don't you even watch the news? But of course the news is a barren wasteland, you know. It's unbelievable. Anyway, now I'm going off on my own tangents. But so yeah, I think it's not easy. It's not easy. But if you know, if you think about certain topics in our history, and some of them fairly recent, that were like, no, it can never happen, no, it can never, no, it can never, no. And then all of a sudden, oh yeah, it happened. You're like, whoa, how did that happen? It's like that beard that turns gray, you know? I think this is one of those. I think if people keep talking about it, and if the legislators feel that the people are interested and just keep bringing it up, even if it means someone is going to argue about it, all right, let them argue. You know, you don't have to come to blows. That means that for 5 minutes, you and someone else have been talking about the Electoral College. That's a good thing. So that's kind of a long-winded, my personality comes out after the script is done. I'm sorry about that. Yes?
Well, first of all, thank you. I think I speak for myself, but hopefully a lot of people here when saying that we've all thought these myths were myths for a long time. Seeing the numbers laid out like this is super helpful. I'm a huge data person, so this was like, finally my eyes have been opened and I can quote statistics to people and, you know, use that to support my
I can
arguments.
refer you to some more, but anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
My question is, the biggest hurdle I see to this right off the bat is that the senators and congressional representatives who are most likely to have clout on this issue are also the ones who are oftentimes harboring ambition for a presidential run. And the Electoral College as it currently stands makes the campaign map infinitely easier for a potential president than like actually having to hit all the different states, or rather, I don't know if easier is the right word, but they can certainly game the system. And they're, you know, also the money is going to them because the corporations are backing it, you know, seeing good presidential candidates. So the money is all going toward people who are not necessarily going to want to abolish the Electoral College. And we all know money talks. Thank you, Supreme Court, for that one. So I guess my question is, what pitch do we make to our senators, our representatives who might be on this path of being cagey about abolishing the Electoral College because they see themselves running for president one day, and what organizations can we contribute to counter-finance moves away from the Electoral College?
You hit a big thing there. On the finance part, if you think about it, you know, we have this problem with campaign finance and needing to reform it and these enormous sums of money. Well, isn't it kind of nice that you only have to spend that money on the swing states? What if you had to spend that money all over the country? I mean, there's got to be a bottom to that pot somewhere, you know. So, yes, it's very tied in with money. A candidate who envisions himself running for president and wants to game the system is playing a dangerous game because both sides can game the system. And so it can fool them one way or the other. And wouldn't it be better for them, you know, if you try to appeal to their altruistic tendencies, wouldn't it be better to be a candidate for the whole people? And even the current president has mentioned on several occasions, I would rather not have the Electoral College, because the impression one might get, if one were to think that, was that he might see it as his pride was hurt because people are saying that he didn't really win, you know. So there's some of that. I think you need to look at the representatives and senators who really do not have presidential ambitions. They don't all have presidential ambitions. And if the voice is loud enough and if it comes through enough, they're not going to wind up being president if they get voted out of their representative seat or out of their Senate seat. So they need to worry about the short-term consequences too. If they really feel the people want this amendment and want them to support this, and they might lose their position because people will vote against them, that, you know. But seriously, our next step, you know, we've done this presentation. We were kind of waiting for after the election. We are, what we decided, we're going to talk to maybe one of the senators or our representatives, try to get a sit down and ask what would be a good strategy. So we ourselves are seeking what would be the best strategy to appeal to the congressman on this issue. So if we get any pearls of wisdom, we'll share them. We do have an email list, and we have a little MailChimp mailing that goes out periodically. So If you just send me an email on one of those email, and we'll add you in and keep you posted.
Email address.
Yes.
We will get you on that list.
Right. So does that kind of cover what you're talking about?
So the only other part was the only other part was, are there any organizations besides League? Obviously,
Oh.
that would be good for financing moves away from the Electoral College.
As far as I know, other than there's a group working on the compact that's doing that. But as far as I know, the League is, the only group I know of that's organized this, and no one else has come to me. There are other people looking at different things. Lawrence Lessig is kind of a gadfly, and he's bringing a suit because he feels winner take all is wrong. And so he's trying to get the Supreme Court to overrule winner take all in the states, but he's not been successful. So people are trying different ways. I think that's kind of what we're fighting. They're trying to find all these oddball solutions other than an amendment. But an amendment is the straightforward, legal, consistent way to do it that the American people will understand. If it gets presented to them as a constitutional amendment, they know what that is. And if it gets passed as a constitutional amendment, they say, okay, that's it. So as far as I know, the League is the only one right now. We'd love to have partners, though. We'd love to have partners.
Is there anyone well-known, any politician who has said that they agree with you?
Well, almost all the ones that signed on to the compact, for example, would like to see abolition. They see the compact as just a stepping stone. So, for example, Durbin has come out in favor of the compact. Well, he's certainly in favor of abolition. So we have Professor Edwards and Professor Ginsburg who specifically endorsed our presentations, and you have their biographies out there. And then, of course, Representative Rangel and the other one who presented it to Congress last time. So that's one of our things we have to find out. Who's on our side in this new Congress, and who can help us.
If we call our representatives, do you want to try to advance the legislation that's already been proposed?
Currently, there is none. So what we need is someone to propose the legislation. Try it again, yes. So everyone who taught, from as many different quarters as they can hear, that'd be great.
And my question is, so is the League's position then that you're really going for both? That you're going for the Interstate Compact as an intermediary strategy, and then, but using that opportunity to educate people that that's just one step. If that's the case, I'm wondering with the change in the House and the flipping of a lot of the legislatures, if there's any analysis on the states that now more likely will sign on to the Interstate Compact, because it's not that many more we need.
It's not that many more that are needed. The position, the League of Women Voters of the United States believes that the direct popular vote method for electing the president and vice president is essential to representative government. The League of Women Voters believes, therefore, that the Electoral College should be abolished, which would be by amendment. We support the use of the National Popular Vote Compact as one acceptable way to achieve the goal of the direct popular vote for election of the president until the abolition of the Electoral College is accomplished. Then it goes on to say, the League also supports uniform voting qualifications and procedures for the presidential elections. There's nothing uniform about the compact. The League supports changes in the presidential election system from the candidate selection process to the general election. We support efforts to provide voters with sufficient information about candidates and their positions, public policy issues, and the selection process itself. The League supports action to ensure that the media, political parties, candidates, and all levels of government achieve these goals and provide that information. So it was inserted. There are certain leagues in certain states. For example, Florida, California, Colorado, Oregon, Arizona. Those states are trying to get their, well, California already signed on, but those other states are trying to get their legislatures to sign on to it. So our efforts we are pursuing an amendment regardless of what those league members do, and we're not interested in expending any energy on it. One, we already have it in Illinois, so why would we expend, energy on it? And then secondly, I can describe the process to you without speaking against it. So here's how the compact works. If enough states that have 270 votes between them sign this compact, they agree that if an election such as the last one occurs, where one candidate has more popular votes but the other person has more electoral votes, then those signees will switch their vote if they were against that person in order to go for the popular vote. So the compact assumes, it requires that someone's going to have to change their votes, because otherwise it wouldn't go into effect because the electoral and the popular would be the same. So, for example, take the 2016 election. Let's look at Wisconsin. Now, in 2008, Illinois signed on to the compact. Back in those days, Wisconsin was more liberal. They might have signed on too. Let's say back in 2008, the compact got signed and they had enough votes. All right, now comes the 2016 election, and Clinton leads by 3 million votes, but Trump has won the electoral vote. If Wisconsin were a signee, Governor Walker would have to turn to the people of Wisconsin and say, well, I know you think you all voted for Trump, but see, we signed this deal 10 years ago. So we have to give our electoral votes to Clinton. And so I just put that before you without further comment. And therefore we are pursuing an amendment. It's kind of a cheap theatrical trick, but I couldn't help it. Does that really address? I know there are people who are so fervently in favor of the compact. I know that they really feel that it's going to happen sooner than amendment. I'm not convinced that it will happen sooner. If it does, fine, more power to them. But I really don't think that those last 98 votes are going to be that easy to get, and then how will they be enforced? And then what about the turmoil? And they say, well, there'll be some turmoil, but then people will say, well, let's just have an amendment. And we're afraid, oh, there'll be so much turmoil that people will say, forget it, we'll just stick with what we had and let's not make any changes. So there you go. I may have spoken out of turn a little bit, but just a little bit, Yes.
Hi, I had a question. I'm at the lake downtown, and that presentation was so great that you just gave. Have you worked, because we have such great momentum right now, because we got a lot of people out voting. Like there's like a young, like Chicago Votes. They're young. They're out of Hyde Park. They're awesome. Like our chapter out of there is pretty awesome too. So. Have you connected with some of these other nonpartisan places?
We're trying to. We'd love to, sure. And this is available. They could use it themselves. They don't even have to have an old lady come do it. They could, really.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great, especially now since they've gotten pretty good momentum on voters.
I hope
it's
so.
kind of like the next step, right?
If you know some people, let us know. Yeah, we'd love to. We'll go pretty much everywhere. We're going to Galena in January. To give this to Joe Davies County. If we don't, have you ever been to Galena in January? There's that road with no guardrails on the mountain. And anyway, it's very bad. Any other questions?
Are there any other questions? Okay, well, thank you again, Rosemary.
Thank you very much.
And for those of you who are not league members, this is just a small slice of what we do. Audra Wilson is here. She's the Illinois Executive Director. Jenny is here, and she's on the board, yes. So you can talk to Rosemary, you can talk to me. Kat is back there, Jenny or Audra, if you want to learn more about what we're doing as a league in Chicago.